I actually got a colostomy when I was 21, so I'd gone through a long time of
Hmm.
struggling, a lot of tests, a lot of medical stuff. My bowel
Yeah.
itself prolapsed when I was about 16 internally, then externally when I was about 17, 18. So I'd had a proper full bowel prolapse
Wow.
for 3 years without, and that was undiagnosed until I took a picture and said to the GP, that's what's going on. Okay, so that's where I got to, which wasn't pleasant, but
Wow.
yeah, so I'd been struggling for a long, long time. So I actually asked for a colostomy bag because it was like that was the only thing I could think would help.
Adam, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I was just looking outside and it's kind of getting sunny, which makes me excited for summer. So,
That's all right for some.
looking forward to some spring.
Yeah, definitely.
So, first question that I like to ask absolutely every single person is, how do you refer to your disability?
So, firstly, so I use identity first language personally for my disability. So I class myself as a disabled person. Could totally respect anyone who
Hmm.
sees it different. That's just my own personal way I do it. So my
Hmm.
disabilities are I'm autistic, ADHD, got eating disorder. I've got sort of chronic mobility issues which are undiagnosed. I've got chronic bowel disease, which is not
Hmm.
formally diagnosed, but sort of they know it's happening. I've got a colostomy bag because of that. Um, what else? I've got various other issues that are long-standing based on what my eating disorder caused and things like that. So there's quite a lot flying around, but overall package of
Hmm.
me, I guess.
I like that you said that it's a package of you because, as we all know, like everybody's disability is completely individual to them, and we can have the same diagnosis on paper, but actually how we relate and how we talk about our disabilities are very, very different. And with that in mind, what was childhood like for you, and that growing up, and that with autism, ADHD, and then also like chronic bowel problems and everything else that kind of gets thrown into the mix? What was that experience of growing up like?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't know I was autistic and ADHD until I was 26, so only a year and a bit ago. So I grew up not
Wow.
knowing, which made it quite
Hmm.
difficult because I was always so what I didn't know then, what I know now is I had my mask on 24/7, 365. Okay, so I was always the really confident one, the outgoing one, the one that was absolutely fine in primary school anyway. But looking back, there were obviously signs that I was autistic even back then and ADHD. The
Oh,
little
yeah.
things like even when I was like really young, my mum would say I'd always like look for validation when I was doing things. I'd never be instigating anything. I'd always be joining in and stuff like that. Just little signs. My ADHD,
Hmm.
again, it was covered up mostly by the fact I was quite academic, but I'd always make what was classed as silly mistakes and, do really silly things. Like one day we were down at the beach and I just had an impulse and I chucked my friend's glass in the river. Don't know why I did it. Just happened. It was complete impulse. And I felt as soon as
Yeah.
I did it, I was like, what did I just do? But it was like that impulse thing. I don't think people
Hmm.
quite understand that that wasn't me. It was that side of me doing it. It wasn't like me,
Hmm.
which is really strange. But then my bowel issues started when I was between primary and secondary school in the summer, quite
Hmm.
very sudden, which was quite difficult because it was like one day I was fine, the next day I wasn't. It was literally that quick, um,
Yeah.
and that I think started this sort of triggering of periodic overwhelm, which eventually meant I burnt out, which is when my eating disorder got triggered. So that
Hmm.
plus moving to secondary school overwhelmed me completely. Didn't know I was autistic and ADHD, had no support because of that. Parents were amazing, by the way, but they didn't know either. Um,
Hmm.
and I just burnt out, and then my eating disorder started again very suddenly. So all these things very suddenly starting meant that my boundaries immediately went from like they're right out to not much, and they changed literally overnight. And since then, as things have progressed, it's almost like you've got your boundaries are constantly changing as things change. You think you've got to a stage where you're managing things, and all of a sudden you're not, and something else starts. So, my bowel issues were what they were. Then all of a sudden they got a bit worse, and then all of a sudden my bowel prolapsed, which made it even worse. And then all of a sudden my
Yeah.
mobility issues started, which meant I couldn't do the things I was doing anymore, and then started getting really bad nausea and sickness, which meant and then had to have operations and recovery from that. So it's basically just this constant changing of boundaries and constant, people think once you've got something or once something's happened, you just find a way to manage. But that way of managing changes over time as you change as well. And I think that's perhaps one of the most difficult parts, I guess.
Yeah, that that last bit that you just said about how the way that you handle things and your boundaries change over time as you change and as things progress or as things change is such a key takeaway, because just like everybody else who doesn't have a disability, disabled people grow and they change, and the way they relate to their disability changes, and knowing that the goalposts move as you move is really important, because I think sometimes we have a tendency to be like, oh, we know what it is, we'll do it in black and white, we'll put you in a box and that's it, sorted.
Yeah,
Like, and particularly sometimes when we're thinking about neurodiversity, I think everybody thinks it's either one or the other. It's either ADHD and autism, and
yeah,
very rarely they think it's like the two together. And actually, that in and of itself is a problem, because again, no matter what your neurodiversity is, how you relate to it's going to be completely different. And also, what triggers you is going to be different, and what your stims are going to be completely different. So that is a really important like piece to take away, is that goalposts move as you move and as you grow, and that's the same with all disability as well.
yeah, 100%. And they change over time as well. So, I've always said I've almost become more autistic and ADHD over time as I've become more and more sort of in my life has become sort of more stimulated and overwhelmed, I guess. Your
Mm-hmm.
triggers become less as well. So what
Yeah.
actually triggers me into a stage where I can't cope is much less than it used to be, because everything else is so heightened. And I think that's a bit that changed quite a lot as well. And autism and ADHD contradict themselves every day anyway, so which is always a fun bit of management.
Yeah, and I like, so I am fairly sure I'm undiagnosed ADHD, because my I laughed when you said that you grabbed your friend's glasses and threw them in the river, because I can relate to that on so many occasions. Because I feel like I've done that, and then I've been like, "What did I do that for?
Yeah,
Like what was the point in that? Like, it served me no purpose, served nobody no purpose." But again, like how you relate to it, how you talk about it, and actually looking back on childhood, there are so many things where I can be like, pretty sure that's ADHD.
yeah,
Pretty sure that that was ADHD. Like, oh, I do that. Oh, like
yeah,
ADHD.
yeah, totally.
With that in mind, and thinking about how your disabilities impacted school life, when you were thinking about careers and like what you wanted to work in, did your disability ever factor into that?
Um, for a long time, no, because I was very like when I was between sort of the ages of 14 and 16, and well even 17, I was very like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a mechanical engineer. I'm going to go to uni, get a master's in mechanical engineering, do all that, be fine. Because at the time, I thought I was managing things, because I got to a stage where I was sort of
Mm-hmm.
managing it better, right? And I was playing football, or I was doing everything I really enjoyed, and everything
Yeah.
seemed fine. And so I was really just dead set on like that's what I want to do. And it only really started hitting me when I got to sort of the second year of my A levels, when I became really quite unwell, sort of both with my eating disorder and sort of with the general burnout. And my bowel
Mm-hmm.
issues got to the stage where I was, literally in agony every time I ate and things like that. It was really difficult to manage. And that was the first time really I thought, actually, can I do this? Still went to uni because
Mm-hmm.
I pushed through, because I was still in a bit of like denial, like, I need to do this. This is my only shot at a career. I'm going to fail,
Yeah.
otherwise I'm not going to be anything or do anything. Because our school was quite elitist in that sense that, well, put it this way, I said to our head of sixth form one day that I didn't want to go to Oxford or Cambridge, and he didn't talk to me after that for 2 years. So it was that sort of person, right? The teachers were really nice, and the school was a nice place, but there were certain people in there who were quite pushy and quite
Mm-hmm.
expecting of you. And I was very expecting of myself, because I wanted to get the best marks possible, because that was my drive. That was, what I had to do. Otherwise, I fail again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this was my brain talking. But so I went, I did exams a couple of days after an operation. I did everything like that, really. Really silly things that you
Wow.
shouldn't do, but you do it because you think that's the only way you can achieve in life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it was only really after I had to basically come home from uni and go straight to hospital for a few weeks, that I really started rethinking, actually that's probably not the right path to go down for me, because but basically I completely burned myself out trying to be this perfect person, while
Mm-hmm.
I was really struggling inside and with my body and my mind just fighting against me. And that definitely changed my perspective on things, I guess, quite a lot.
Yeah. And you just said that you did an exam after an operation,
Yeah.
which I think that there's a part of like younger version of me that's screaming inside because I can't imagine the pressure that you put under yourself to do that and almost like put that front on that everything is okay, even though like what 36, 72 hours ago you were on an operating table.
Yeah, it wasn't great. It was literally I think it was the last exam I had. It was in year 12 before this. It was in the AS level year.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, well, if I didn't do that, then I don't know what will happen. So obviously, I wasn't in school at the time. I was at home, obviously. And after that, I didn't the break. The usual break between year 12 and 13. You do sort of the first step of year 13. I missed all of that, literally all of it. I didn't even go in because I was still recovering. But still got
Yeah.
in for those exams. So yeah, no, I look back now and just think you silly person, but it sounds stupid. But if I was in that position again, I'd probably have done the same thing because that's how my brain is.
Yeah. But also you don't know what you don't know
Yeah,
until someone shows you and that as well is something to be said because like you said you got a late diagnosis of
yeah,
autism ADHD which also must have impacted like how you were during your exam periods and stuff but obviously unbeknown to you that's why you were the way you were and again like reflecting on that do you feel like you had a bit of a grieving process when you got your diagnosis?
I think my grieving process came beforehand actually, because by the time I got the
Okay.
diagnosis, I just knew. So
Uh-huh.
it was really when I started realizing that that might be the case is when I went through that grieving process because I thought it started me thinking like I've literally spent my whole life fighting against this. All the
Mm-hmm.
times I was overwhelmed, all the treatments that people tried that didn't work, all the times people, said certain things and said I was acting certain ways and ostracized me for certain things, and actually it was just who I am. But I didn't know how to
Mm-hmm.
explain it at the time. So I think I went through that process sort of beforehand, because by the time I got the diagnosis, it was like it was just a confirmation for me rather than a diagnosis, if you know what I mean. Because I'd been
Yeah.
waiting for sort of 2 or 3 years to get to the stage of getting the diagnosis, so it was almost like I went through that process beforehand because I realized all the pain that I and my family had been through, because my family obviously didn't know. Um, and I
Yeah.
look back, especially when my eating disorder, when my overwhelm first started, when I was about 11, 12, and I went through a stage for about 3 or 4 months where I was literally every single day I was screaming when we got to school, just didn't want to go. And it was all put down to sort of behavioural stuff and that sort of thing. When it wasn't, it was just me being completely overwhelmed by life, and no one
Yeah.
knew. And had we known it, I'd like to have hoped it would have been dealt with by school, especially differently. My parents did everything they could anyway, but I'd like to hope school would have dealt with it very differently. And I
Mm-hmm.
would have had potentially a bit more support to get through it, even though support out there isn't amazing. But yeah,
I think it's really interesting when we look back at school, especially as disabled children, because we realize that actually schools do not have any of the setup for disabled kids.
no,
Like that, and that is regardless of what, like, it's completely irrespective of what your disability is. Whether you're a wheelchair user, like me, who's limb different, like you, who's autistic ADHD. And I guess at some point as well, you had like you say you have a colostomy bag, right?
yeah,
And at some point that also plays into school and disability and
oh,
how the school handled that and
yeah.
like how was that as well like on top of being undiagnosed how was that experience?
So that was just horrific because I'd literally by the time I was sort of 15, I was spending 3 or 4 hours a day in the bathroom, okay, every day. Around school, around
Wow.
revision, around playing football 6 days a week for 3 different football teams, everything. No one, very few people knew.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the one example I'll give is that every single day I'd be in a lot of pain, but then I wouldn't be able to drink anything because my bowel issues mess with my hydration, so I wouldn't be able to drink all day because I didn't want to go to
Yeah.
the toilet during lessons. Then another time when I went to school in the morning and I had a bit of a blockage in my bowel. This was before colostomy, before I knew what it was. But I basically blacked out because of the pain. Not passed out fully, but fell over just before school started because of the pain. Um, Somehow got to the first lesson. Teacher saw me like a sheet and told me to go home. Um, but then I basically just, after a couple of hours, I went back, had a couple of hours sleep, and then went back into school because I would have lost my 100% attendance, and we got a reward for 100% attendance. So to avoid losing that, I went back in for the
Yeah.
afternoon. Um, no way should I have done that. And again, and this is, people say, "Oh, why didn't your parents stop you?" I was 16 and they couldn't stop me. If I wanted to
Yeah.
do it, I'd do it. Um, so I did that because, and that's another way schools weren't set up, because no way they should have even let me back. Because I was unwell.
Yeah.
Um, but they didn't know how unwell because I didn't tell them, because I just managed it. 'Cause I didn't
Hmm.
want to tell them because it was like they wouldn't understand, and they wouldn't understand anyway. But what could they have done? Probably nothing, because the schools aren't set up to accommodate that sort of thing anyway. So it's just
Yeah.
a bit of a mess all around, to be honest. And the education system in general just is not accessible at all.
Mm. No, and that is right. There is so many issues surrounding accessibility, particularly in education, that you know, it's really when we think about education and we think about how it works, like we go to this building and we're there from like 8 until 4. And when we're there, the people who are in that building meant to help take care of us as well as teach us lessons and all of that kind of stuff. But when you don't necessarily fit the mold, as in like you're neurodiverse, you're disabled, or like whatever your difference may be, and you're stuck in this place, it can exacerbate the issues because you don't have that. Escape is not necessarily the right word that I'm looking for, but it's that place where you feel safe. It's
Safety,
not
yeah,
home because you don't feel safe. There are other people around you who, classmates, who some you might get on with, some you might not get on with. And particularly when you're feeling vulnerable, and vulnerability and disability kind of go hand in hand quite a lot of the
yeah,
time when you're out in like the public outside of your own home. Being vulnerable in that space is very, very scary.
yeah,
And that's not like a nice experience for anyone to have to go through alone, and then not being able to tell their friends what's going on, or not feeling like they can't explain or don't want to explain. That's a hard place to be.
very, very hard. And then you spend your whole life, or you spend all your growing up life pretending to be someone you're not, and then people wonder why by the time you're in your sort of 20s you're absolutely exhausted because you spent your whole life
Yeah.
just pretending, and you don't know who you are either, because you've just
Mm-hmm.
denied that person any sort of validity, I guess.
Yeah. It's I can like hearing your story and hearing particularly like surrounding school and childhood, and I can completely understand as to why you were burnt out. Like I completely understand because I'm sat here and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel exhausted listening to you because I can just imagine how much like time and effort it was for you to be masking, particularly as an autistic ADHD person, because that wearing your mask is so tiring. On top of that, you're dealing with bowel issues, which, you know, are not that great. Let's just throw in like eating as well. Let's throw in an eating disorder for fun. Let's add all these other things. And like, no wonder you got to the age where you suddenly were like, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I'm tapping out. Like, this is me. This is burnout. I need to just do something that's completely different and chill. And being burnt out, what has the recovery period and process of that looks like for you?
Um, so at the start, when I left uni, I literally spent 3 years not working because I couldn't, I just wasn't
Mm-hmm.
in the right headspace. I helped my parents with renovating the house and stuff like that, but didn't work, couldn't work, not full time anyway. I did a couple of part time things, but since then it's almost like, because especially before I got a diagnosis and even now really, I don't. The way burnout works is it's almost like in a cycle for me. So I go
Mm-hmm.
through cycles where I think I can manage, and then I just burn out, burn out, burn out, burn out, crisis. Okay, let's change things. Let's do it again and again and again and again. And
Yeah.
it seems to be a bit more like that, rather than, I don't think I've ever had like a full defined, let's call it, recovery from burnout, because when you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to especially when you're autistic, but especially with the fact that a lot of my other disabilities, the pain and the bowel issues, they're permanent. They're never going to go, and they're going to get worse probably as I
Yeah.
get older. So that almost puts me in this constant state of stress and overwhelm, which means that you
Hmm.
can never fully, even if I didn't work, I would still be in the state of that stress and overwhelm. And then you add work on
Yeah.
top of that, and it makes it harder because you're then trying to work within those boundaries, but also work in a society and in a no matter how accessible a workplace is, it's never fully accessible because they're not in the way society currently
Hmm.
works because they can't be because society is not accessible. So you add all that together, and it's really just you're just constantly trying to keep on the right side of coping, I guess is the right way of putting it.
Yeah.
That's the best way I can describe it, really.
But I think that's a really important. I think that's a really important thing to say is that actually you're on the right side of coping, and there is a lot of overwhelm, particularly surrounding the disabilities that you have, because as you said, like it's going to get progressive. It's going to get progressively worse. Oh my god, I fumbled that word. My god, I tripped over that, didn't I? Yeah. So for you, it's going to get progressively worse, or that it's not going to get better. And I don't say that to be what's the word I'm looking for? I don't say that to be like mean or harsh or sad, but I'm just regurgitating what you said, and that in itself must be quite hard to deal with.
It's hard when you every time you go to an appointment and they say there's nothing more we can do, we just got to try and manage things. And that's where I'm at now with a lot of my issues. So
Hmm.
spoke to a gastroenterologist yesterday. He said literally, I can't help you. I literally cannot help you.
Hmm.
I don't say any of this to be negative, by the way. This is just reality.
Yeah.
And I don't, I think too often we see a lot of portrayal of disabilities in the media and things like that, which are all, you know, really positive, and that's great. My life has a lot of positive parts, but there's also this part which is not positive and it is difficult and it is disabling. And I think we need to, I'm very big on, I actually want to be real about how life is. And it's not like,
Yeah.
it's not easy at times. And like you said, when you hear from, these are really, esteemed specialists that they cannot do anything more to help you because medical science isn't there.
Hmm.
It's quite difficult to sort of think, actually, well, yeah, I've just got to learn to manage now. And whatever happens next, I'm just going to have to learn to manage that. And we're just going to have to go for symptom management as best as we can. And there's ways of doing that, of course. But it's just, yeah, it's just try to thread the needle, if you like, and try to find the best ways to manage those symptoms because there is no cure, there is no better. There is just let's try and find a sustainable way to manage things, I guess.
I really like that it's honesty, because you're right, a lot of portrayal of disability is very, very positive, and that isn't everybody's experience. And don't get me wrong, it's some people's
Yeah.
experience, and that's great, but equally that's not everybody's experience. And quite often we hear of these really inspirational disabled stories where someone has climbed Mount
Yeah.
Kilimanjaro and they've got like no legs or they've got no arms, and it's a feat. And I'm not taking away from that at all, because that is genuinely an incredible
Oh
feat,
God, yeah.
but sometimes that's not possible.
Mm.
And it's finding that in between, that medium of, do you know what, like I'm not a Paralympian, I'm not a great athlete, I'm not this like quote unquote good accepted disabled person by society, because
Mm.
quite often they're the only good representations that we have. But equally, like I'm not down and out, I'm not a benefit scrounger, I don't sit in that pool either. I'm somewhere in the in between, but actually I'm just going to be very realistic about my life. And the fact is that there is this part of my life which isn't particularly positive. And, like you said, doctors can't help me. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because the science is not there to be able to help
Yeah.
me. And actually, as much as, positivity and mindset can help in that situation, you also have to be very, very real about what's in front of you.
Hmm. Yeah. It's the way I sort of try to describe it is what I am able to do within my boundaries.
Yeah,
And that's,
yeah.
people often say, oh, you need to get out your boundaries, step out your comfort zone. But for me, that causes harm. So actually, it's what can I do within the
Mm-hmm.
boundaries I've got because I know them well enough now. And as they change, they'll change. But we know our boundaries, and I think it's people need to trust disabled people more, that if we say this is a boundary for me, this is what I'm able to do, and this is what I'm not, we don't then try and get forced or pushed out of that just because other people think we can do something different.
Hmm. Yeah, I really like that. There's You're right, disabled people know their boundaries very, very quickly.
Mm,
And stepping over that line like is not necessarily safe.
no,
And I'm all for like stretching your boundaries, and I'm all for like pushing yourself in a controlled environment, particularly when we're talking about disability,
yeah,
because there's a lot of other factors that play into that. It's not just, can I push my boundary and can I push myself further? Is it safe for me to do so? Will I be supported? Does the support exist? Because if the support doesn't exist, then I can't do this. And that's very factual. And that in and of itself is another sticky point for all people with disabilities, because the support doesn't always exist. Like we've just spoken about school and how actually the scholastic system is
yeah,
completely ill-equipped to deal with any form of disabilities. But actually, when we look at society as such, it's very much the same.
yeah, 100%. And quite often you get the comments, oh, well, this person's got this disability and they can do it, so why can't you? And it's like, well, they're in different circumstances and their disabilities affect
Yeah.
them differently. And, they might have additional privilege, which means they can do it and be safe, whereas I can't do it and be safe. And it's those things that we
Mm-hmm.
need to consider, that we need to, it's about every single person is a unique individual, regardless of what their diagnosis is. And they will have different ways of working, managing, doing everything. So I think people just need to judge less, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. Judge less. That's the main takeaway. Just judge less.
Yeah.
Do you have a piece of advice for a younger version of yourself?
Um, don't fight against yourself so much is the advice I'd give,
Mm-hmm.
and learn to take a step back sometimes. Because
Mm-hmm.
I was very, very single-minded throughout a lot of my childhood, and to the extent where I forwent things that I really wanted to do and enjoyed doing, because was so single-minded on, this is what I want my career to be, this is what I want to do. And I think the advice I give myself is just take a step back and find what makes you feel safe and happy, rather than what you think everyone else wants you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because that, I think, would have helped. I don't think it would have prevented everything, but it would have helped manage it better. Because I would have been in
Yeah.
a safer place in my own head and body and life as well.
Yeah. And I like the idea that find like almost find your safe space in yourself,
Mm,
because it can be quite scary when you're pushing yourself to do something that you believe other people want for you rather than what you want for yourself. But being able to find safety in yourself is actually something that is really important, and particularly when we're thinking about younger kids, and particularly surrounding that neurodiversity, where sometimes the outside world doesn't feel safe because it's
yeah,
different from how you work. That having that safety within yourself is almost like the most valuable thing that you can have.
100%. Yeah,
So through hard times, I like to think if you can look back upon reflection and think about a positive thing that's come out of it, a positive trait within yourself, something that you've managed really, really well, then you've learned something. And I was wondering, through any hardship that you've had, is there been, upon reflection, something that you look back on and actually there's a trait, a positive trait that you have that you're really proud of?
yeah. I'd say it's made me a lot more empathetic, I guess is the right way of putting it. It's made
Mm-hmm.
me realize a lot more about others' struggles, and to be more empathetic towards them, and to support my family, my friends better. And I think, actually, like I said, there's a lot of negativity, but I think without without all this happening, I would have been very selfish,
Mm-hmm.
very not closed-minded, but very selfish and very self-centered and very driven in a not necessarily in a good way. Because I was very
Mm-hmm.
smart academically, so that would have just been my complete focus, and it would have been me. But I
Yeah.
think what going through all this has allowed me to do is be a lot more, like I said, a lot more empathetic towards others and a lot more supportive towards others, including family members who are disabled, including friends who are struggling. It's widened my friendship circle massively. It's widened my horizons within life because I want to learn about a diverse range of people as well, rather than just
Mm-hmm.
be stuck in my own bubble. Um, so I think from that sense, it's definitely, and it's made, again, it sounds strange, but I've got a much better relationship with all my family now than I probably would have had to, because going through all this, as you go through together when you struggle as a family, especially if you've got a family who are amazing like mine, you become closer through it,
Mm-hmm.
which I think that's been a real gift, you know. I'm 27
Yeah.
and we, as a family, we're as close as we ever have been. And I think that's amazing. So
I really like what you said about like going through struggle together, because there's a lot to be said in having support in your struggle, but also when you, the disabled person, are struggling, particularly when you have a close knit family, it's not just you that struggles, it's also the people around you because they don't necessarily know how to help you.
yeah,
And particularly, like you said, like late diagnosis, like, and I mean like late diagnosis in life, I don't mean
yeah,
like late diagnosis, having that experience and bringing you together closer is actually, yes, it was horrible and it was hard and it was awful, but now you can almost be like, okay, too much for me, I need to go and do this to almost like self-regulate, I need to chill, I need to have a moment. It's not that I don't love you loads, but I need to have a moment for myself.
yeah,
And having that must have been all like life changing for you.
completely. Yeah, we just have that unwritten sort of rule that we just, if we're talking in a room and one person needs and I need to walk out, I just walk out. No one cares. If we're all sitting at a table and I'm eating something
Mm-hmm.
different to everyone else, no one minds because we just do it. If I'm,
Yeah.
we went out for a meal over Christmas and because of my bowel issues, I couldn't eat because I was having a bad day, and
Mm-hmm.
so I just had a coffee and they all ate, and no one. It was just like normal, completely normal.
Yeah.
Um, and it's that sort of thing. And I think the other part is that we are now so open with each other. There's no taboo. There's no too much information. We literally just, no matter what happens, no matter what we need to help each other with, we'll just do it without even thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it's just allowed us to just go, "Well, actually, this is life. So why should we not talk about it? Why should we not support each other through it when we love each other?" And I think that's
Yeah.
been an amazing part of it because we've just realised that being honest with one another is not a harmful thing. Actually, it's a really helpful thing because we can then support one another too.
I was wondering surrounding your colostomy bag.
Mm.
Was that a difficult experience when you were younger to have to go through that operation and then get a bag and all of that kind of stuff? Because there's quite a lot of like intricate pieces of the puzzle when it comes to gaining colostomy, because it's not like you walk in one day and be like, okay, the answer is this.
Yeah.
It's very much a process. And what was that like for you?
So my I actually got a colostomy when I was 21, so I'd gone through a long time of
Mm-hmm.
struggling, a lot of tests, a lot of medical stuff. My bowel
Yeah.
itself prolapsed when I was about 16 internally, then externally when I was about 17, 18. So I'd had a proper full bowel
Wow.
prolapse for 3 years and that was undiagnosed until I took a picture and said to the GP, that's what's going on. Okay, so that's where I got to, which wasn't pleasant, but yeah,
Wow.
so I'd been struggling for a long, long time. So I actually asked for a colostomy bag because it was like that was the only thing I could think would help. I actually had to get it done
Mm-hmm.
privately as well because the waiting list was so long. So yeah, that was expensive. Um, but it was the only way I'd have been able to do it because
Gosh.
it's just as I got my first full time job. I'd moved to Birmingham from the Lake District. And I was like, I need to get this done as soon as possible so I can, you know, carry on working.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. But it was difficult to adjust to for sure because you're going from one thing to something that needs different form of management, and then I had to learn to manage that, and I have to do a thing called irrigation of my colostomy every morning, so that takes a few hours every morning
Mm-hmm.
to do. So you've got to add that into your routine. You've got to you've got to work out all the equipment you need to take with you, everything like that. So it's quite a whole scale change,
Mm-hmm.
amongst a lot of other things too. But yeah, it was difficult to adjust to, but I think by the time I was a lot of people who get colostomies, ileostomies, anything like that, it's a very sort of it's either an emergency thing or it's something they get told to do by the medical professional. Whereas I was like, well, I think this is the only way. I went to see them and said, I think this is the right answer. What do you think? And they went, yeah, we agree. And that's where it got to. So I was almost the one instigating
Mm-hmm.
it. So I think it was a little bit easier for me to adjust mentally in that sense because I was already
Yeah.
there.
Mm-hmm.
But it was still difficult for sure.
I kind of love that you instigated it though. I love that you were like, actually, this is what I think is the right answer, and I need this done like yesterday, so let's do
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I'm quite once I know what needs doing, it's like right, I need to just get it done, you know. And I think that's
Hmm.
another thing. I think yeah, I'm sure you're the same. I'm sure a lot of people are the same. We know our bodies. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes, yeah, yes, we're not medical professionals and we're not trained in knowing exactly what medication counteracts with one another and what all that sort of thing, but we know our bodies and we probably know more about our conditions than most non-specialist professionals do.
Yeah.
So, if we go to a GP and say, I think, my GP is great now. He says, if you come to me and say, I think this might work, I know you've done the research, so just tell me, I'll check it's safe and then we'll have a go if you think it's the right thing.
Hmm.
And I think that's the great way of doing it because it's like actually just trust us that especially if you've got long-term conditions, we've researched it to the end of the world, so we understand. And I think having that trust that obviously medical professionals have a major role to play and shouldn't and don't just listen to whatever anyone says. But I think it's about trusting the person that they know the body at the same time. And if we say something's wrong, something's wrong. You know?
Yeah. That's so true. Because when I think of the experiences that I've had with doctors and I've had to go in and explain, I've been like, well, my knee's really sore. And they're like, oh, like maybe it's just growing pains. And I'm like, actually, my knee is sore because my hips are out of line. And my hips are out of line because my shoulders are out of line. And my shoulders are out of line because I don't have a right hand.
Yeah,
And then they kind of sit back and go, yeah, that makes sense. And I'm like, I know it makes sense. It's my body and it's also my life. So I'm very aware. Either I want painkillers or I want physio or I need help from someone.
yeah,
And it's so true as being able to go in and be like, this is what I think, this is what I know. How can you help me facilitate the answer?
mm,
And it's having that, like, having trust with doctors is not always a given with disability because quite often there's a lot of medical gaslighting, there's a lot of medical misogyny.
yeah,
But if you do have a doctor that you can trust and that you can go to with, like your weird and wonderful problems, which we all have,
mm.
then that's like something really special that you've got, and you kind of got to cling on to that for as long as you can.
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
So with your lovely host of disabilities, do you get a particular set of questions surrounding them that are a bit odd, or have you ever had like the odd question that's come up and you think that was just a really bizarre question to ask me?
I'll be honest, I don't get anything majorly bizarre. I get some slightly strange ones about my colostomy, because people don't know what it is, don't
Mm-hmm.
know how it works. It's like so you get some strange ones about that. You get people who are scared to like go near you because they think it hurts and that sort of thing, which is a bit. I just say, look, you could punch it and I won't feel a thing, right? I have to stick my hand in its finger in it sometimes and you can't feel a thing. So don't worry. But you get some strange ones like that. You get, but I've never had a really outlandish question from people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm quite lucky that most people have just respected what I say. But yeah, you get some of the strange ones, and people sort of, thinking that you're suddenly like this delicate person as soon as you tell them. But yeah, it's never been too bad to be honest. I've been quite lucky in that sense because I know some people have got some really strange ones in the past.
Yeah. Doing this for as long as I have, I've heard some real corkers of questions, and I'm always fascinated whether or not like the public interacts with, like, depending on what your disability is and if you choose to disclose it, how the public interact with it, because I think people are naturally very curious, which is great. Curiosity is actually really interesting,
Mm,
but then there's also a line, right, where the weird questions are actually very bizarre. And like, if you wouldn't necessarily ask your friend that, then why are you asking me that as someone who you've just met? And I think that's where I find that bit of disability so interesting, because some of the questions people get, like, can you have sex? And you're like,
Oh, I've
yes,
had that. I've had that. I mean,
can you?
I'm asexual, so I don't. That's not a problem for me. But people go, well,
Hmm.
how do you have sex with classmates? It's like, oh, you just do. It
Yeah.
doesn't stop your body from working. You know, the rest of you still works. It's like just ignore that bit for a bit. You know, it's not a problem.
Hmm.
Um, it does. You are totally right about the boundaries, though. The who was it? The ask, don't assume thing. All that marketing about
Oh, the American Army.
yeah, yeah, and the I think the UK government came out with this thing saying, oh well, if you're not sure about a disabled person's needs or disabilities, just ask them, don't assume. And it's like, well, yes, but
Oh, yes, the
that should
government
be that
campaign.
should be asked, but don't assume within their boundaries and within reason. Don't just go and ask anything, and don't go and ask someone who doesn't want to be asked. And it
Yeah.
just that really got to me because like, well, people are just going to take advantage of that if you're not careful.
Hmm.
And I'm sure they do. But that just that really irked me because it was like, well, people are just going to start asking really stupid questions or that questions that are actually quite insulting because
Hmm.
they feel empowered to do that. It's just
Yeah, and also I think with that campaign, I can't believe I thought you were talking about the American Army at first. That's also really funny. But with that campaign, it was almost like they were trying to fit actually very complex and very nuanced conversation into like a three word whip it,
yeah, yeah,
and making it like almost super accessible. And you're like, actually, you just made the whole thing way more inaccessible than it was in the first place. And also, you've just put the entire onus on disabled people. There is no room for accountability. There is complete lack of understanding. This is very, very fluffy and very, very pretty for something that's actually not very fluffy and very pretty. And you put a very quote unquote nice face on something that's not. It's not a good issue. So yeah, I'm completely with you on that. That
100%.
campaign really upset
Yeah,
me.
100%. Same here. It was just like, no, just don't. Please don't come up to me in the street and ask me. You know, if I'm leaving an accessible bathroom, just accept that I need to go in there. You know,
Yeah,
I'm getting a blue badge soon. It's like, well, because my mobility issues got worse. And it's like, well, if I'm parking in that space and I've got a blue badge, it's because I need it, not because I'm
yeah,
taking advantage. You know, just because I look young and because I, can stand up and I can walk 50 meters without falling over. You know, it doesn't mean I'm not disabled. You know, it doesn't mean I'm not in pain.
yeah,
Just accept.
exactly.
You know, the better tagline would have been, "Don't be a dick." Really.
Oh, you can say that. I say
No,
that all
don't
the
be a dick.
time.
Yeah,
Like,
that's the best one. Is don't be a dick. Yeah, just
yeah.
just respect other people. That's all you need to do. It's just
Hmm.
so easy. It's
It,
so
yeah,
easy. It's actually harder not to do it, in my opinion. But anyway,
yeah. I only have one final question for you, and that is, Adam, are you disabled and proud?
yeah, yeah. I'm proud of me. I'm proud of every disabled person who carries on living and trying to do the best within society. Every single person, I'm proud of.
Yeah. I have really enjoyed this. I've genuinely learned a lot, and hearing your story, I can so see how you're so passionate about making sure that everybody feels like they're included in the space. And I love that because I think there's so much to be said for that. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I've loved it.
No, thank you. Really appreciate it.